Welcome to the Great Hall of the National Gallery of Victoria. My name's Michael Williams. I'm the director of the Wheeler Centre and I'll be your host for this evening's proceedings. And welcome to the 2014 Gribble Argument, the inaugural Gribble Argument, an event that is the first in what we hope at the Wheeler Centre will become an annual event, a tradition that adds to the cultural and intellectual life of this country in a way that does justice to the name, to the remarkable woman who lends the event its name, Gribble. We're very excited to be here tonight. There are many people I'd like to acknowledge who are here in the audience. The Honourable Paul Keating, once and future Prime Minister, great to have you here. Board members and staff of the Wheeler Centre, our patrons Tony and Maureen Wheeler, our partners, our sponsors, and perhaps most importantly, the members of Di's family and the network of friends, former colleagues, and people who owe their professional lives to her. Thank you to you all for coming along this evening and helping us kick off what we hope will be a remarkable tradition. And also a welcome to Mark Carnegie, our inaugural Gribble arguer. He's a generous and tough thinker, and he's prepared something significant, substantial and provocative for us this evening that I'm sure you are all going to enjoy or hopefully be really pissed off about, one or the other. That would be great. I'd like to acknowledge that we're on the traditional land of the Wurundjeri people and pay my respects to their elders past and present and the elders of other communities who may be with us this evening. The Melbourne artist Tom Nicholson, who's got an exhibition in the State Gallery of New South Wales at the moment, has in his program for that exhibition an acknowledgement of country. And the acknowledgement begins much the same as the words that I just outlined. But he goes on to say that for him, an acknowledgement of country is about the acknowledgement that the moral and legal implications of invasion remain unresolved in this country. When I read that, that really struck a chord with me. I thought it was incredibly thoughtful and interesting, but I liked it most of all because it seemed to me what Tom was doing there was taking rote recitation, something that we participate in because we believe in it, but that has somehow kind of fallen back into rehearsed words and things that we hear again and again, and injected it with personal meaning. And that's what we try to do throughout the year at the Wheeler Centre with our public conversation. We believe that public conversation is the foundation of any good society, any good community, and we endeavour to make it entertaining, to make it challenging, and most of all to raise the level of it. But tonight, nothing so highfalutin. Tonight we're just about picking a fight. We think we could argue a little better in this country than the way we do. Enough partisan bickering, enough posturing along rote scripts that are pre-prepared. We think that a true argument should make us better, should challenge us, should shift our way of thinking, and should move us on to become a better society and a better community. I'd like to pause at this moment to take a moment to remember Di and to draw the link back to why we feel the argument is the right form to take to remember Gribble. And I'm going to ask to come to the stage Eric Beecher, Chair of the Wheeler Centre and a close friend and colleague of Di's. Please make him very welcome.
Thank you, Michael. There are two reasons that we're here tonight. The first reason is Diana Gribble. Di was a thoughtful and inspirational woman, a distinguished publisher, a cultural force, a true iconoclast, and a great friend and mentor to many people in this room and beyond. Di was my business partner and friend and collaborator for more than 20 years. The second reason we're here is an idea. When Di passed away almost 3 years ago, a group of her friends, family and colleagues started talking about a way to permanently perpetuate her memory and her ethos. The first thought was to create an annual lecture, but there are plenty of those, and it seemed a formulaic kind of approach and therefore very un-Di-like. What we were looking for was an enduring idea that captured Di's essential spirit. It took some time, but that idea finally popped out when her great friend, Chong Weng Ho, had one of his creative inspirations. What Di always relished, he said, was a really good argument. An innovating, thought-provoking, respectful, ding-dong argument. He was right. It was an inspired thought, and the result is what we're about to all hear tonight. The first ever Di Gribble argument. So prepare yourself to engage in a challenging and risky idea, motivated by a remarkable Australian who loved arguing and taking risks. Thank you.
A couple of brief rules of engagement this evening. You're all part of this thing now. You're here, you're in the room. We want you to participate. Doing 200 events a year at the Wheeler Centre, we know two things to be true. One, there is nothing worse than audience questions. And two, there's a special place in hell for people who force audience participation. But tonight we're going to throw caution to the wind on both those fronts. We want you to be part of this argument. The point of the exercise, as Eric outlines, is that we want to provoke. We want you to go into the night bickering with one another. No, not bickering, that's too futile a word. After all, this isn't the Di Gribble quibble. This is something more serious. This is about a kind of substantial change that can be made. You're going to be provoked by our arguer tonight into thinking about the way we live and thinking about it differently, and hopefully affecting some real change. He's going to deliver the argument, and then you're going to have a chance to eat your main courses. Fight amongst yourselves, if you like. And then we'll return and we'll have a chance to hear from a couple of fixed rebuttals that have been prepared earlier, and then throw to you and find out what you think and the challenges you want to pose to Mark. But without further ado, I might introduce our arguer. Entrepreneur, venture capitalist and philanthropist Mark Carnegie has had a near 25-year career as an investor corporate advisor in New York, London and Sydney. All second-rate cities, I think you'll agree. His principal of MH Carnegie & Co. and was previously head of LCW Private Equity, Lazard's Australian private equity business. Mark co-founded Carnegie Wiley & Company, one of Australia's leading independent corporate advisory and investment firms. Carnegie Wiley & Company was then acquired by Lazard on the 31st of July in 2007. Mark's director of Lazard, Macquarie Radio Network Limited, and a large number of investee companies. He's a former director of Lonely Planet Publications, chairman of STW Communications Group. He was chairman of that from 1993 to 2005, and president commissioner of PT London Sumatra, one of Indonesia's premier plantation companies from 2004 to 2007. About 6 weeks ago, there was an event in Sydney called the Remix Conference, which was people in the arts and tech and marketing coming together and patting themselves on the back for being generally awesome. It was a festival of self-congratulations until Mark Carnegie took to the stage. His opening words were, "Well, you people really fucked it up with that whole Transfield thing." And the room was electrified. People were challenged on the very things that they've been patting themselves on the back for and feeling comfortable and secure about. And that's Mark to a T. He was also a friend and long-standing colleague of Di Gribble, and he's well and truly ready to pick an argument tonight. Please welcome Mark Carnegie.
Ladies and gentlemen, I've come here tonight looking for an argument. And if I get one, then I hope it will have made a contribution to the national debate. If my proposal causes you to start a conversation with your neighbour, it will have already begun to work. Now, why was I asked by the Wheeler Centre to do this in Di's name? Well, the truth is, it's because whenever she and I were together, we argued. But the funny thing is with Di, the more I argued with her, the more I loved her. It's because our arguments were not shrill and divisive, but warm, supportive, and constructive. Di's gift was to bring people together with wildly different views and then get them to argue for a productive result. I'm sure many, many people in the audience remember her doing that for them. Di worked her magic in matters of business, current affairs, and often just misunderstandings amongst friends. She was what George Eliot wanted from her ideal collaborator, someone whose warmth was incalculably diffusive and whose empathy radiated in all directions. Tonight, I hope she's looking down and smiling in that gentle way of hers as I start an argument without her, but in her honour. Robust Australian debate has been a central pillar in developing our nation, and we're better for it. I contend that there's a connection between the quality of our lives today and the quality of the argument we have had about the critical issues facing the nation since its founding, and that now we need to invest in genuine debate for returns 10, 20, or 30 years down the track. Now, the OECD's Better Life Index ranks Australia as the country with the best quality of life in the world. Remarkably, the OECD also ranks Australia as a world leader in civic engagement. About that, I disagree, because I think the current state of citizens' engagement makes me terrified for the Australia we will leave for our children. In my view, being a citizen of Australia should require more than a choice at the political smorgasbord once every 3 years. I believe it should require active participation. American Democratic activist Carl Hess said, "People who drop scraps of paper in a box are not acting like citizens. They are acting like consumers. All they can do is pick what is. They cannot actively participate in what should be." We need to restore a culture of active participation in our society. How are we going to do this? My proposal is simple. I believe Australia needs a form of compulsory national service, but without the military uniform. And it needs to be able to call everyone to do what is asked of them if their number comes up. Now, my proposal might not work in many other countries, and it will not appeal to everyone in Australia. You also might think me as naive, because it's inconvenient, expensive, and in the short term, the returns are limited. Nor do I imagine either side of politics will jump to support it. But I do hope it will be debated, because something is clearly needed. Also remember, before you reject this idea out of hand, that a variation of my proposal designed for America was tried in America, and it was wildly successful. John F. Kennedy introduced the Peace Corps, and we still remember. Now, Australia, for too long, has been handcuffed by the nickname of the lucky country. Donald Horne coined the phrase and said, ambivalently enough, Australia is a lucky country run by second-rate people who share its luck. Now, in his book, Why Australia Prospered, Ian McLean makes a devastating case against Horne's view. McLean argues we have made our own luck. He pins our success from the arrival of the First Fleet on the capacity of the society we formed and the institutions we established to resolve bedrock arguments amongst us. Now, I'm the first to acknowledge that Indigenous people are still excluded from the national debate, and that is a continuing tragedy. But for the rest of us, time and again, we've come together to resolve issues that could have torn the infant country apart, such as disputes between the squatters and the settlers, or questions of how to divide Australia's gold bounty. More recently, we came together as a nation to turn the economy around with the Hawke-Keating 1983 National Economic Summit, the subsequent Accord, and 30 years of working together. In all of those cases, we found a mechanism to build social capital. Now, what is social capital? It's the network of trust and collaboration that links individuals into a society and strengthens the nation. It's what weaves us together as a community, and it's what distinguishes our success from the failure of other resource-rich countries like Venezuela or Nigeria or Angola, or the list goes on and on and on. Now, it does that in many ways. It does it through bringing people together in such everyday organisations as surf clubs, RSLs, community organisations and religious groups, giving them an opportunity to talk to each other and build a sense of common identity. The fact that our institutions are strong, stable and transparent ensures that there's an umpire on the field and that we're all playing by the rules. Now, the horrifying ICAC process underway in New South Wales, whilst it is horrible to watch, should give us faith that the truth will ultimately come out. We might complain about our education and health systems, but they are amongst the best in the world. And we need to remember that Australia's rules and norms, like our system of compulsory voting, have been a bulwark against the even greater levels of political disengagement seen across the developed world. Now, I'm convinced that the most important assets on the national balance sheet are to be found in the resourcefulness of our people, not our resources in the ground. Social capital is like our physical infrastructure. It's rarely built quickly and thus needs to be created well in advance and then sustained through a regular maintenance and repairs program. We must invest today for returns in 2050. Social capital can't be built at an individual level, so we need to do this together. Currently, what we do together is, when we talk about politics, is more often to complain than to contribute. Thus, the machine of democracy goes on without us being engaged in it. The splintering of media has increasingly given a voice to those people at the extremes. Not only are the voices of passionate extremists louder and more pervasive, but they now echo through our political institutions. We have not yet had the virtual derailment of sensible government which has emerged in other countries. But we should not, however, regard ourselves as invulnerable. The best protection we can have is an informed understanding of our civic obligations and responsibilities. Now, more and more people are doing exactly the opposite and disengaging completely from politics, or, in the alternate, becoming single-issue evangelists, a trend that can only lead to the dictatorship of the passionate minority. As Yeats said, the best lack all conviction, while the worst are full of passionate intensity. My argument tonight is that compulsory civic service is the maintenance program Australia needs. We live in challenging times, with productivity growth, an ageing population, structural changes in the mining and manufacturing sectors, and the continued rise of Asia. We need to think our way through these complex issues to develop a set of responses on which we can agree. Now, Australia is on the eve of the centenary of the start of the First World War, and it's hard not to be moved by the ghosts of the young men who, seasick and scared, landed on those beaches in Turkey. We'll hear a lot more about them in the coming months and years, and we're going to hear a lot about duty and sacrifice. Now, the notion of duty just shouldn't be ring-fenced into instances of military involvement, for we currently face not a military threat, but a social one, and civic service is our means of defence. It also builds on another proud Australian tradition. For we are one of the few countries in the world that has compulsory voting. We embrace compulsory education, and we accept, albeit reluctantly, compulsory jury duty. We sign on in these things to the important concept of everyone participating in mandated duties that strengthen the fabric of our nation. For this reason, it is not a question of impinging on personal liberty or freedoms. Civic service is an extension of Australian values. In her 1995 Boyer Lectures, Eva Cox said, "The state needs to be part of creating tolerable social structures which are capable of reinventing themselves as open, egalitarian and democratic. Therefore, logically, we need to establish the political frameworks which encourage good citizenship, but do not impose them by fiat or by leaving a vacuum." To my mind, this is the problem with so much contemporary political commentary. We have an elegant and well-reasoned diagnosis, and then the advocate backs away from the remedy at the moment of truth. The key phrase I object to is "do not impose," because if we don't mandate participation, we will continue to wring our hands and drift. We need a legislated solution that enshrines an Australian commitment to preserving and maintaining social capital, just as our commitment to compulsory voting preserves our democracy. I want Australia to have a genuine debate, a real argument about the extent and manner in which we ought to have compulsory civic service and how we could best spend our time doing it. Civic service, if implemented, will give Australia a 2-for-1 return. The first return is just from everyone participating, which strengthens of itself the fabric of society. The second is the outcomes that are generated from the work that is done. Now, the uses of civic service are myriad, but as I see it, there are 4 broad ways for people to spend their time. The most straightforward way for civic service to work would be to require people to work for charities that need volunteers. Greater charitable work would advance our proud spirit of volunteerism and amplify the extraordinary work that many contemporary organisations are already doing. We're all aware of the pivotal role of the Country Fire Association in drawing people together in rural Australia. And the more historically minded know the spirit of pioneering collectivism in our national narrative. Now, you might not know, but already 38% of us volunteer somewhere. So we will need to make sure we don't crowd out existing volunteer activity. Now, I am firmly of the view that some clever arrangements should be put in place for existing volunteers that would work. The second heading is that students and retirees could be brought together for mentoring and wisdom transfer, addressing issues of social isolation for older Australians and helping to educate young Australians in things that matter beyond the classroom. Alternatively, we could revive the ancient Athenian model of democracy, where citizens were chosen at random to form juries of 500 that would deliberate and decide on public issues, taking responsibility for key elements of the government's work. The model has been revitalised with the work of James Fiskin at Stanford University, and closer to home, we've already conducted citizens' forums on pressing issues. The New Democracy Foundation is promoting this type of activity on a voluntary basis. For example, both Adelaide and Sydney have commissioned citizens' forums to consider how to make nightlife in their city centres both vibrant and safe. Now, you need to understand, I am not proposing a metastatic 2020 summit, quite the reverse. I'm suggesting a series of discrete meetings to solve real-world practical issues. Just one example. I'm firmly of the belief that if computer science students teamed with people who've suffered chronic health issues to tackle the vexed problem of electronic health records, I'm sure the disruptive approaches that they came up with would be vastly better than anything we've seen to date, saving Australia billions each year and providing a great outcome for people incredibly in need at the moment. Finally, crowdsourcing could be used to give a voice to ordinary people, not the lobbyists, industry groups or professionals who already have the ear of government. We've seen changes in technology bring about huge shifts in collaboration, from Kickstarter to Wikipedia to Linux, the crowdsourced operating system. Now, if this works in business and it works in philanthropy, then it should be able to make a contribution to complex social problems too. For example, and I've seen this firsthand, it could be used to identify Australia's most pressing infrastructure bottlenecks, not just the most high-profile ones. Or instead of the government seeking long written submissions ahead of the budget, which are then dissected behind closed doors, it could provide a far more interactive forum where people pitch ideas to the public with a bank of experts to help. Creating a closer connection between the government, public service and the citizens can only make for more effective policy making that delivers the kind of society we all want. Now that's what civic service could be used for. I also think there are different ways it could be implemented. Most simply, we could reintroduce the National Service Scheme that stopped in 1972, but get those drafted to do non-military work. This, however, would mean the burden of civic service would fall on just one group of people, 20-year-olds. Now that's just not fair. Instead, we should spread the ballot principle over the whole community, recognising that the old and the young are in a position to contribute more time than those in employment or people with a young family. For working people, time taken away from paid employment is expensive for the nation and disruptive for employers. However, national service must be universal. Now, I think an adequate balance would be a week or so every several years for employed people. And I believe that the civic engagement created by even this limited amount of time has already been proven to be very effective in other circumstances. I also worry that the burden of civic service would fall hardest on small business, which would be least able to cope with the disruption. This is why I consider that, similar to the arrangements for defence reservists, employers should receive financial support to help meet the costs of releasing employees. But as Peter Strong from the Council of Small Business Australia said to me, small business people, perhaps more than anyone else, understand the need for a cohesive Australia. I realise there's no way compulsory civic service can be implemented without it costing several $100 million. But I believe the money spent will prove to be a compelling long-term investment for the nation. When the Wheeler Centre asked me to come here to start a row, I wanted to say something that meant that, even if I lost the debate, I could win the argument. National service is an idea upon which to build and argue about. If we discuss my proposal properly, we're already halfway towards achieving it. Now, I cannot help but view Australia from the perspective of a long-term investor, for that is what I am. And I invest for social returns as well as financial ones. When I look at where we are today, I believe an intergenerational investment is called for. National Civic Service would not be easy or cheap, but it would deliver a high social return for Australia. It will lead to financial returns as well, because we can only tackle issues like increasing productivity or growth in a post-manufacturing economy from a position of unity. Now, introducing Eva Cox, when she gave that Boyer lecture I talked about earlier, Di was right when she said, "There's a danger that we will all retreat from participating in public life, preferring the comfort of small, closed communities." The falling tide of civic engagement will not be arrested by willing it so. Like the Athenians, we need a system in which we know that as Australians, when we are called, we must come. Reject my proposal if you will, but only after coming up with a better one. Continuing to bleat about disengagement and blaming others is not the act of an engaged citizen. It is simply chatter under the white flag of surrender. Di cared about argument and she cared about Australia. She would have wanted an argument about compulsory civic service, and I believe she would have been a passionate advocate. Let the argument begin.